Welcome to episode 80 and the first of 2022 of the G2 on 5G. It's the latest insight scoop on everything 5G. We cover 6 topics in about 15 minutes, and it's brought to you by More Insights and Strategy. I'm Will Townsend, and joining me again this week is fellow analyst Anshel and Will. Let's get started with my first topic. And boy, the drama continues with the FAA. And so on New Year's Eve, the Department of Transportation sent a letter to Verizon and AT&T, I'm assuming T-Mobile as well, asking for another 2-week delay on 5G deployment within the C-band spectrum. Now, initially, both AT&T and Verizon pushed back. There was a letter published in the Wall Street Journal. It was very interesting. It was on Verizon letterhead, but signed by John Stankey, the CEO of AT&T, and Hans Vestberg, that's the CEO of Verizon, pushing back, explaining that they're willing to enlarge the exclusion zones around airports, pointed to France as an example of that, where US airlines are operating today. But a few days later, they acquiesced. And so the drama just continues on this. And I read through that letter that was posted to the Wall Street Journal, and both CEOs did point to the fact that, hey, the Treasury collected over $80 billion in revenue. From my perspective, if there are these concerns around, outdated altimeters and that sort of thing, let's go to the Treasury, let's go to the FCC, let's procure a couple of $1 billion and take care of this. I mean, the carriers have already paid for the spectrum, and it's ridiculous for them to continue to have to be blocked on getting this deployment in the C-band spectrum, because it's mission critical to both Verizon and AT&T from a mid-band perspective. But what's your perspective, my friend?
I think I take an even more aggressive stance, because the truth is that this was $80 billion. To your point, these filters that they need already exist. They're already deployed in Europe. Most commercial aircraft need them because they're going in places where it's already deployed.
Yeah.
Everybody knew the spectrum was going to be utilized, so this isn't a surprise to anyone. I think this is a very clear example of the FAA and all of its stakeholders choosing to wait until the 11th hour, which I would call November, maybe end of October, which is when they started raising these concerns, when this was supposed to be something that launched in December. So really, this January delay is another 2 weeks on top of the month delay we already had, right?
Yeah.
So, and then there were stories that came out that said that the FAA and the FCC never really even achieved anything over the holiday, the pre-holiday meeting.
Right.
There was no kumbaya moment. And my belief is that there are very clear disagreements, separations between the FAA and the FCC. FAA is a part of to your point, Department of Transportation,
yeah.
And that is Pete Buttigieg's. He's the secretary, right? So it's his job to be responsible for the Department of Transportation, and ultimately, I think he has failed to do his job.
I agree.
Because the FAA is part of the Department of Transportation, which is part of the executive branch, while the FCC is actually part of the congressional oversight. So we have different groups overseeing these different agencies, and they're not working together, and they should be.
Right.
And truthfully, I've heard people say that this C-band issue has been a continued problem for decades, and that this is something that the FAA likes to bring up every so often as a problem, but doesn't actually address. So this is kind of an unfunded problem that no one wanted to pay for.
Yeah.
Now there's 80 billion plus on the line, because let's be honest, it's more than $80 billion that's on the line. Exactly. And I just think that this is a perfect example of government failure. Whether you want to blame the Trump administration or the Biden administration, I think this goes far beyond both those administrations, and even previous FCC chairs. I just think that this is a continued failure on multiple levels, and it just needs to be dealt with. And there are already existing filters out in the market today that from multiple vendors that can be installed in aircraft. I've seen them. I've done the research. It's a thing. So the fact there is no good excuse other than the money, and that's
Yeah.
why I think this entire discussion ultimately boils down to the FAA and their stakeholders want a piece of that $80 billion.
They do, yeah. And just to your job, to your point, Mayor Pete, Secretary Pete, I'm assuming that he's not that technology savvy and understands the real issues. And so he's pushing paper. And yeah, I mean, the FCC brought in excess of 80 billion. So shave off a couple of billion to pay for these altimeters and be done with it, and quit putting the operators at risk here, because there's an opportunity cost with all of these delays. So we'll continue to monitor this, and I'm sure you and I will talk about this on future podcasts. But CES is happening this week, and it's, as a lot of folks expected, is sort of a shadow of its former self, even this year as well, with the surge in Omicron. But there are a lot of announcements coming out of CES. I've been tweeting a few, but you wanted to provide an overview of what you're seeing as significant from the show this week. So take it away.
Yeah, so usually CES is not a big smartphone show. That's usually MWC, or over the last couple of years, it's just been every vendor does their own thing at their own pace, right? They've kind of moved away from the big show model. But
Apple does their deal, right? And Samsung does Unpacked, right?
Yeah, so it was really interesting to see this year that we actually got a lot of smartphones that launched at CES, which isn't really something that's happened for quite some time. And I've been covering smartphones for over a decade. So it was really interesting to see, one, all these phones are 5G phones. And two, that Samsung, OnePlus, TCL, Vivo, Nokia all launched phones at the show. So we got Samsung with the Samsung Galaxy S21 Fan Edition, also known as the FE. It's usually, last year's S20 was a very popular device. And it looks like the S21 FE is getting a lot of good reception because it's got a great processor, great price, lots of good features. Overall, it's very well received by the industry. And then OnePlus kind of teased their OnePlus 10 Pro, which will actually debut in China first, which is very atypical for them. But because of their integration into Oppo Group, or deeper integration into Oppo Group, that's probably why they launched in China first, because of the similarities between their software. Then TCL launched the 30 series of 5G phones, including the 30V and the 30XE. And these are much more budget devices. They're designed to, hit a very specific price point. And they have a lot of good features for the money, which is kind of TCL's thing. And then Vivo launched the V23 Pro, and Nokia launched the G400. So these are both very budget devices. And the big one that I think a lot of people are going to miss or not know that happened at CES was AT&T came out with their own phone, and they launched a $220 5G millimeter wave phone. So I believe it is actually the cheapest millimeter wave capable 5G phone. I think I don't think there is one anywhere else in the world, because they most of these cheaper 5G phones don't support millimeter wave, which means that this phone will not be a MediaTek based device. It's going to have to be a Snapdragon, but it's called the Fusion 5G, and it's literally $220. So I think when you look at this phone, it's definitely going to be something that AT&T will use to increase their user base of 5G phones and getting people off of these slower 4G devices. They might even give it away for free, but honestly, I think at $220, they're probably already taking a considerable hit.
I would think so. I mean, is that, Anshel, is it designed for prepaid or postpaid or both?
Both, from what I can tell. I didn't really see anything, but they had a monthly price on it. I think they just want people to switch to it. It'll be available on the 7th when this publishes. So you'll be able to go and get it right then and there. They're offering it for $6 a month.
Wow.
So that's a very small price to pay to upgrade to 5G. And, they're obviously pushing their unlimited plans starting at $35 a month when you get 4 lines. So they want as many people to switch to 5G as possible, especially with mid-band potentially coming soon. That, the more 5G users you have on your network, the more efficiently you use your spectrum and the faster everybody's connections are.
Yeah, no, that should get grandma and grandpa, to get off their 3G handsets, right? and move to 5G. But wow, that's a pretty compelling price point. So awesome. Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, there aren't often a lot of smartphone announcements, but it sounds like there were a bevy of them. And I know you're going to talk about Samsung and Qualcomm with your second topic, but let me jump to my second topic. I want to talk about Dish. And the big question that I'm asking myself as we pop into the new year, are they going to miss their deadline to meet their 20% coverage requirement for their 5G deployment? If you recall, in fourth quarter of last year, Dish was talking about having, a proof of concept ready at CES, where they would be demonstrating what they claim to be over 100, towers that were lit up. And there was none of that at CES this week that I could tell. And so what's really critical here is that, even software defined and Open RAN has complexity. Operators talk about the agility. Rakuten has talked about the agility. They've been the poster child for Open RAN and SDN and cloud native, but it requires a different set of ecosystem partners and integration challenges. And as we look at Rakuten, they've had challenges in the past as well, and they've had delays. So what's happening now is that as we enter the new year, and we're in the new year, obviously, Dish has a requirement that they have to have 20% of the US population covered by mid-June, or they're going to owe huge penalties, $2.2 billion in penalties. So where they're at now and where they need to be, in about 6 months, I think it's going to be a stretch for them, but would love to get your insight.
I think you're right to question their ability to deliver on time. They've already shown that there are some delays, and they've delayed more than once, right? So I think they've gotta show us proof that they have something, and CES was their opportunity to do so. I think CES is a good way to kickstart something like WiMAX did. They used CES to launch WiMAX, and let's be honest, Vegas is supposed to be the primary launch opportunity for Dish. So the fact that they missed that, in my opinion, does not bode well. Yeah, I mean, rolling out a 5G network isn't easy. There's going to be Dish, and there's also going to be Verizon and AT&T, and all three of them are going to be aggressively trying to roll out their networks, while T-Mobile is also doing the same thing. So there's going to be a lot of network rollouts this year, and I'm not really sure whether Dish has the resources in place to make that happen.
Yeah, I mean, they've acquired through the divestiture that was required of T-Mobile some prepaid subscribers, and they claim over 1 million. And so that's likely where they're going to start, but the money's in postpaid. And so they're going to really have to focus on differentiation relative to the established incumbents. And we've talked about T-Mobile. They are clearly in the pole position with respect to deployment with low band and mid band. And really, honestly, Dish is going to have to come up with some sort of unique value proposition, some sort of differentiation. About a year ago, I wrote an article and kind of spoke to, hey, maybe that's IoT. I don't know, but they're going to have to find something to hang their hat on, because as it's been witnessed with T-Mobile, they were a one-trick pony for many, many years with consumer, and they saw the value in the acquisition of Sprint, merger, with Sprint, to not only bring them those critical mid-band spectrum assets they needed, but also to bring some enterprise acumen to allow them to compete with AT&T and Verizon that are very well established within the enterprise. So I don't believe this bodes well. I've tried to reach executives. You and I have great relationships with all of the carriers, but with Dish, it's sort of a black box. And I've seen Mark Ron, who is the executive vice president of network build out. There was an announcement this week about a person that's now the president that Mark is going to report under, but from my perspective, they've got a long way to go to hit that milestone by June. And I don't believe the federal government is going to give them a stay. They're probably going to collect that, that penalty. And this has been one of the concerns, and I've talked about this on prior podcasts, that, Dish has been hoarding spectrum for quite a while and did nothing with it for many, many, many years. And they were really kind of forced into this position. You've got to deploy or you're going to lose it. So it'll be interesting. We'll keep tabs on it. But let's move to your second topic. And I alluded to this already. You want to talk about Samsung and Qualcomm. And, they're doing something around 5G NR, right?
Yeah. So they, there's a lot of these trials that are going on. And Samsung and Qualcomm managed to work together in a lab setting to essentially reach a new peak throughput on Samsung equipment and Qualcomm equipment. So Samsung networks and Qualcomm handset. And basically what they were able to do is combine millimeter wave, 800 megahertz of millimeter wave with 100 megahertz of midband, aggregate those together, and they hit 8.08 gigabits per second of throughput in the lab. So this is obviously not a commercial network deployment, but what it's showing is that we are actually able to get closer and closer to the theoretical maximum of these 5G modems that are in market today, and that it's possible to actually get close to hitting 10 gigs. The real question is whether or not anyone has enough spectrum to hit 10 gigs. But we know that 8 gigs is now possible because it's actually been done on commercial hardware. But it really comes down to utilizing a commercial network at this point. And millimeter wave is still going to be something that's going to be very hard to find, and it's going to be mostly in public areas, mostly in places that are very densely populated. So I think that there will be places where 8 gigs might be possible, but realistically, 8 gigs is still going to be something that will be a rarity.
Yeah, I agree. It'll be the exception, not the rule. And but it's thinking about 8 gigs, that's freaking mind blowing, man.
Yeah, I actually had a friend post a something on Twitter where he was able to achieve 7, almost 8 gigs on his fiber line. Where he had a 10 gig fiber drop to his house. So it's pretty crazy to think that would be potentially possible over 5G.
Yeah. Wow. Cool stuff. Well, let's move to my third and final topic this week. We have lots to talk about, so we're probably going to run a little bit longer than normal, but I want to talk about Nokia and Ligado Networks. They announced a partnership for deploying LTE and 5G private networking. So what's so unique about the tie-up? Well, from my perspective, as I dug into Ligado and their capabilities, they've got some pretty unique mid-band spectrum assets that will allow them to deploy, pretty widely, both LTE and 5G private networks. And I've spoken about Nokia in the past. Relative to their traditional incumbents, they're in the pole position with respect to private wireless. They have the most deployments. They've been at it the longest. And I expect, and I spoke to this on a prior podcast, that Samsung is going to step up, and certainly Ericsson with Cradlepoint, they'll close the gap. But right now, Nokia is really shining, and this announcement is really just another proof point that points to Nokia's momentum. I don't know if you had a chance to read into this announcement, but any insights you want to provide?
I didn't get a chance to read into it, but both companies have lots of name recognition in the space. So I think them working together will only strengthen both companies. position in private networking. And to your point, everybody else is playing catch up with these guys. So I think it's a recognition of leadership from both companies and wanting to continue to lead in private networking.
Yeah. Well, your third and final topic, we love talking about conspiracy theories, and I always let you take the lead on these, but there's a new one that you want to share.
Yeah, so this one comes to us thanks to Mashable. This is a story that was published yesterday, and basically it's based on a lot of these 5G conspiracy theories, but part of it is also because Verizon and AT&T were supposed to light up their 5G networks yesterday. Obviously, yesterday they announced a 2-week delay, but there were posts all over social media, on TikTok, on the right-wing network Getter. They were saying that when 5G launches, which already has launched in a lot of countries, or when it gets turned up, some people's heads will explode. And someone posted a video of people's heads exploding and combusting, which,
oh my gosh,
whatever, upon the turning up of 5G in Israel. I don't really know what turning up 5G is exactly. But there's Facebook posts of people talking about how, TikTok and YouTube won't show you that, people are spontaneously combusting due to them turning up 5G today. And then talking about the January 5th deadline. Yeah. And then there's other people who are talking about how the global pandemic announcement of March 11th, 2020 coincides with Verizon and AT&T turning on their new C-band on January 5th, which is exactly 666 days apart. So yes, those are the primary conspiracy theories that we're hearing now. But every time something happens, any kind of event that's happening in 5G, these conspiracy theorists try to latch on to it because they know that there's going to be a big marketing push from these companies trying to promote their new 5G networks. And there's people posting about on Telegram the same Israel 5G head combusting video. And then other people talking about how it's, 666 and number of the beast.
Oh my gosh, mark of the beast. Yeah. I thought initially my theory was this was concern over millimeter wave and the frequency of the spectrum.
Nope.
And now I'm convinced that it's just insanity.
Yeah, I mean, this probably would have been a good episode to break out the tinfoil hats again, but
yeah, no kidding.
Honestly, I just think that this is a lot of social media and misunderstanding and people sharing stuff and claiming for it to be real. But January 5th was a very popular day for all these people because they thought the 5G networks were going to get launched, and they were wrong, amongst other reasons.
Well, I wonder if some employees from the FAA are a part of this as well. Maybe even
I doubt it.
I'm just joking.
I think in general, if you just look at it, it's very focused on people that are also against the vaccine. Some of the posts were talking about how if vaccinated people interact with a 5G network, their heads will explode. So it's just a continuation of these conspiracies around 5G and the vaccines. So there's nothing we can do other than try to squash these and make sure people understand how 5G really works and how it benefits people.
Well, that's what we aim to do on our podcast. But it's been a great start to the new year. Why don't you take us home?
Absolutely. We hope our viewers and listeners found this week's topics interesting. If anyone out there would like to provide us specific insight on a specific 5G topic for a future podcast, please reach out to us on social media. Will is at Willtown Tech, and I'm at Anshel Sog. We hope you have a great weekend, and please tune in again next week.